Good evening. My name is Bill Edgett. Tonight, one of the parents chose this time slot to come on and share his experiences. So I'm just here waiting for Trevor Holsworth to join us, and I thought I'd come on because he's not with us right in the moment, so I didn't want to hold this stream up too long. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Bill Edgett, and I'm an alienated father, and I've been going through this process for about 7 years now. It began in December of 2015. It began before that, but that's when I was first served with papers from the court. So this process can go on for years, and you really need a support system to help you make it through everything you're going to deal with over the next so many years, trying to get some resolution in your case if you're going through family court. The best way to deal with the situation is to not go through the courts at all, because the courts, they'll go in and make decisions, and they make decisions based on the adversarial process. For an example, I offered to supply an amicus brief to the court and have an expert testify as to what parental alienation is. And the judge said, well, what's good is that going to do? The other party will have their witness, and we'll still have to make a decision. Now, this is where the judges, the lawyers, and the courts, they fail to recognize these situations. Situations of alienation are situations of abuse, where one parent uses the children as tools to inflict damage and cause pain to the other parent. It's very damaging, both to the other parent, the target parent, and also to the children. So having lawyers and judges look at these situations and try to logically explain them, they have trouble understanding how things work out. And according to Dr. Stephen Miller, he did a study for the state of Massachusetts in 2014. And according to him, in his study, he found that the courts failed to recognize situations of alienation and made wrong decisions in these cases 95% of the time. The reason they failed to recognize or didn't recognize these situations is because they see two parties there. One party is telling a story relatively calm, and it's logical and it makes sense. And they see this other person who is emotional, traumatized, and they're not displaying normal range behavior for the average person. And because of that, they're penalized. That they're targeted by the courts and by judges and seen as the problem. Well, of course you're having difficulties resolving issues with this person. Look at them. They look like they're crazy. They're emotional. They're erratic. They fail to recognize the indicators of trauma that a person is going through. And instead of supporting or helping that person, they usually make decisions against them, which is what creates the status quo in the case. And once the status quo is created, they hardly ever change any decision from their original decision on the matter. They believe they made the right decision, and they think they are very well equipped and capable of identifying situations of abuse, such as intimate partner violence, domestic violence by proxy, or intimate partner terrorism, as it's referred to by Jennifer Jill Harmon. Family terrorism. This is the breakdown of a family, and when the children are growing up in a family unit, and all of a sudden it breaks down. It's very traumatic for them, and they need some stability to get them through it, to adjust to what their new life is going to be like. And usually they get thrown in the middle of this conflict, and they don't know how to deal with this, and it causes a great deal of stress and trauma on the children. And this dysfunctional family unit is where pathologies like narcissistic or borderline personality disorder develop. These personality disorders develop from unresolved childhood trauma. So for me, personally speaking, other than the loss of my grandparents and a friend, a childhood friend I grew up with, and people that were close in my life, the divorce was the most traumatic thing in my life. Now, when a loved one dies, such as a grandparent, a parent, a friend, there's a mourning process that you go through, and you eventually get to move on and have some closure and be able to move on with your life. When you're suffering from alienation, like I said, for me, this is 7 years I've been into this process, and every day I have the same fear that I may not see my children again, or that the situation has caused so much damage that they might develop disorders themselves, grow up, and follow the same pattern of abuse that they were subjected to throughout this process. So that's why I am here. I have tried to learn about this process so that I could help cope with it myself, try to positively help my children through this process. And I'm trying to share the information I've learned with other parents, because I was alone for years, and all I did was hope that things would get better and hope that someone would recognize the truth, and eventually things would change. And they can't continue to believe these lies and go on like this year after year, but they did. And in fact, it got worse. It escalated, which is why most people are afraid to do anything. They're afraid of things getting worse. But if you do nothing, nothing is going to change, and it's definitely not going to get any better. It may get worse. So you either have to learn how to cope and deal with this so that you can deal with it, or you have to either walk away. And that's what some people do. They can't, they don't know how to deal with it. They become isolated. This is all they focus on. Their friends and family get tired of hearing the same thing, don't know how to communicate with the person. And unless somebody else has gone through the same process, no one else is going to understand it. So anyone that is going through alienation, you really need to find some people who understand what you're going through, get advice from them and supports from them on how to cope with your situation and manage, and try to move forward and be positive instead of being afraid to do anything and hope things don't get any worse. Because sitting there in fear and doing nothing, like I said, it's going to keep the situation the exact same way it is, or even make it worse. Because if everything that was done to you has worked to the other party's benefit so far, of course they're going to continue doing the same thing because they benefit from it. So you need to learn how to represent yourself, recognize the different signs, and learn how to deal with the other party, your children, the courts, so that you present more normal than you do a traumatized person. Because if you present like a traumatized person, instead of them recognizing you as a traumatized person or a victim of abuse, they believe that you are the cause of all the problems. And that's when the courts make decisions against you. And once that happens, it's hard to get them to change. It's almost impossible. It takes years for them to acknowledge that they made a mistake and change the decisions that were made. To do that, you're going to need probably a good lawyer and have a specialist such as Amy Baker, Dr. Richard Warshak, um, any professional who is qualified in identifying parental alienation and recognizing the indicators to show that this is a form of family violence, coercive controlling behavior, which is now recognized in Canada in the new Divorce Act that went into effect March 1st of 2021. They now recognize coercive and controlling behaviors as a form of family violence. This is a big step. It's domestic violence has been the term they've used for years, and domestic violence has connotation with it. Whenever I hear the term, I think of, white T-shirt, pack of cigarettes, an abusive male is what I see when I hear the term domestic violence. Now they've changed that to intimate partner violence to recognize that women can also be abusers, or you could have same-sex couples, men, men, women, women, and they're also in an abusive relationship. So the intimate partner violence label is much better. The problem is most people, especially the older generation, myself, people older, still have the idea of what domestic violence is from when they grew up, and that is a man beating a woman. And that's the narrative that's been created since the 70s and is still being pushed by many groups today. Statistically, in Canada, since 2012, more men have been victims of violent crimes than women, and that number is steadily increasing. So now it is flip-flop backwards. While in the 70s, most victims of abuse would have been women, and it would have been the rare case to see a man that was a victim of abuse, because that's how society was. Now that society has changed, we see the numbers changing for the victims of intimate partner violence and violent crimes. And still, there is not many resources out there for men that are victims of crimes or abuse. And in fact, I've seen videos where a man has gone to the police station to report being the victim of abuse, and the police officer told him to leave or he would arrest him. And the gentleman asked what for. He said, "I don't know, I'll make something up. Get out of here." So that is still how most of these situations are dealt with today. The police don't want to deal with them because they don't know how to recognize the difference between an abuser and a victim of abuse, because they are used to dealing with criminals, and they treat these people that are just families that are breaking up, that are not criminals, but they come in and that's the behavior and demeanor they have when dealing with these situations of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And they're very hostile and aggressive, and that is one of the things that will trigger or cause a victim of abuse to act even more on edge. It causes the person to have a fight or flight response, and if they're trying to get help, they're being abused by the person they're seeking help from. So it's very confusing for them to try and get help in these situations, and they don't look well and they don't present well, and the cops don't really want to deal with these situations. So their direction is to refer all these cases back to family courts, so they don't have to make any decisions in the matters. And their way of dealing with things is to arrest people and then ship the paperwork off to the Crown, so they don't have to deal with it anymore. So when police get involved in these situations, it's not good for the party that was the victim of intimate partner violence, because they'll be further abused by the police. And once the police get involved, they will pass on their information to the Crown. The Crown will pass it on to the courts, and this is the narrative that's created for your family court case. And it's very hard to overcome all of these groups working together against one party. And that's exactly what happens. Uh, the police, they choose sides. The courts, they choose sides. Everyone chooses sides, and they think they're well equipped to recognize and handle and deal with these situations. But again, they're used to dealing with criminals. And when they're dealing with family situations, domestic violence situations, usually they're not dealing with criminals. They're just dealing with people that are angry, or possibly an abuse victim that has been in a relationship and not even aware that they're suffering from abuse, or the victim of abuse. So they need to learn how to handle these situations better. I had an interview with Dr. Don Dutton, who recognized this same pattern back in the 70s and started developing a training course to help work with police, because the police recognized this was one of the most difficult situations they had to deal with, was domestic violence situations, or families, or couples. They didn't. They showed up to where there was a battle going on between two people, and they really didn't know how to handle these people or to de-escalate the situation, um, because they're not used to trying to de-escalate the situation. They're used to going in, being forceful and aggressive to try and take control. And if that doesn't work, they become physical to subdue the people and put them in jail. These are not how these situations should be handled. And Dr. Donald Dutton said that he was hired to help train police officers back in the 70s, when he recognized this pattern and the difficulties the police had dealing with these situations. But since then, he's recognized that the situation really hasn't changed. They've done away with the training, and the police really don't know how to handle these situations. And in fact, once they get involved, they pick sides. And again, this is usually where the family courts um, have sides chosen for them. They're friends with the police, they're friends with the Crown. The police speak to the Crown speak to the judges. This all aligns all these parties, the police, the Crown, the judges, and the abuser, all against the target parent. And for the target parent to overcome the abuse from all these parties, they need help. They really do need help, and they need supports, and they need to know how to navigate the situation, because everyone they turn to for help, they think they're going to get help from, has already made their mind up that they're the cause of the problem, and they're not going to help them. So people need to recognize that they're not going to get help from the police or child protection or lawyers or anyone, because none of them know how to recognize these situations. They don't care. They don't want to deal with these situations. They just want to get in the court, let the judge make a decision so they can walk away, and they keep their retainer for their legal services, and then they're done. At that point, uh, the target parent will usually have to seek out another lawyer to file appeals, or to make new applications, or to try to get things changed. All right. I've got Benjamin messaging me right now. Let's see what he's got to say. Oh. Well, I guess Trevor's waiting, but I don't see him in the waiting room. No, I don't see Trevor So apparently Trevor is trying to get logged in here, but currently I still don't see him. Oh, here. Let's try to get this. Uh, I'm not sure. I've apparently Trevor's having difficulty getting logged in. Um, all right. Okay, still waiting here. Let's. All right. So Benjamin is still trying to help Trevor get logged in here so we can speak with him tonight. So I guess I'll just continue going on about this process. Like I said, 7 years. This has been a long time. I've been going through this, and I've tried to document what I've been through and create a roadmap for others to follow. So if they get bogged down in this process, they can make some headway. And I managed to share the information from my trials and errors over the years with some other people, and some other people have had much more success than I did. Um, Basically, right now, I've taken on everyone who has chosen to believe the lies that were told about me and have actively. Uh, well, I was arrested twice. I've been the subject of 3 investigations by Child Protection. I've been cleared of all investigations, all criminal charges, even had a criminal trial. The Crown prosecutor even told a witness not to show up, and that witness did not show up. It was an RCMP officer. So there was a lot of strange things that happened in my case, and I've been fortunate to recognize there there wasn't something right going on. These people are supposed to make decisions and do things in the best interest of the children, follow the rules of court, rule of law. And there was an RCMP officer who failed to show up to court when he was under subpoena by both the Crown and the defense. How does that even happen? I know how it happened. The Crown prosecutor interviewed the RCMP officer the day before the trial and told him not to show up to the trial, and he didn't. Now, when the judge finally got there, he demanded someone find this RCMP officer and bring him to court. Subsequently, I was found not guilty and innocent of the allegations based on the testimony of that police officer. So if that RCMP officer had not shown up to that criminal trial that day, I most likely would have been arrested, ended up in jail, had a criminal record, and probably never seen my children again. So that's what happens when you sit back and hope that agencies are going to help you and people are going to help you and recognize the truth of the matter. They don't. They don't. They don't care, and they will actively work against you. It's 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 hard to believe that the system works that way, but until you've been the victim of how it works, you really don't have an understanding. And that's why these situations go on for years. People don't understand why these people can't resolve these situations. How come? Why can't you just go do this? Why can't you do that? And I've had a number of judges say to me and my ex, you too, you're both educated, you both have good jobs, you get good incomes. How come you can't come to an agreement on these issues? Why can't you come to an agreement on these issues? And that's the key. They see two intelligent, gainfully employed parties who both love their children, but they don't understand why these two parties cannot come to an agreement and why they're there in court to have a judge make the decision. And that's because one party will have a compulsion and they have a need to control everything. And because of that need, there's never going to be any real communication or agreements with them because everything has to be in their terms. And the terms that I was given was I'd be allowed to see my children on the weekends. And that wasn't acceptable to me. So what choice did I have? I could have given up my kids, saw them on the weekends or every other weekend. I was working shift at the time. So basically in a 2-month period, I'd have had my children 2 weekends, 3 weekends every 2 months. And the rest of the time they'd been with their mother. And I wasn't willing to accept that. I just wanted equal time with my children. And that's all I was going for. I gave up everything else and didn't want anything else. I just wanted my children. And now it's 7 years later, and I still have to go to court, make reports to the police, RCMP, and contempt complaints to court for failure to comply with the divorce agreement that we agreed to for custody and access and all the other terms related to the divorce. And they still can't, they still don't understand. They say, you're the one that made the application. Why are you back here in court? Well, I've entered into a contract in good faith. The other party has not adhered to that contract, and this is my only recourse, either to make reports to the police, and once I tell the police, they tell me to make my applications to the court. So that's what I've done. This is the process. And for years, I've made my applications to reports to the police, so it's documented, so I have something to take to the courts to show I'm not just telling a story, I'm not making this up. Look here's the police reports to coincide with what I'm telling you. I'm being denied access to my children. I'm not seeing my children. I just want to see my children. And then they still treat me like I'm the problem. I'm the cause of all this. And it's so abusive. It's so wrong. And people that go through this, they're usually coming out of an abusive relationship. They didn't even realize how abusive the relationship was. But being denied access to your children, or not being able to see your children, it's the most traumatic thing I've ever been through in my life. And I needed help to get through it. And I was fortunate to find some people who had gone through the same as me. They were able to provide me with some information on how I could make my life better. I could make my life better for my children. I could make the situation better. And without that guidance or information, I probably would have ended up not having my children in my life. And I don't know how I would have been able to deal with that. It, it's like I said, it's the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced in my life. So anyone else out there that is going through this, I want you to know you're not alone. There's so many people that are going through the same thing, and no one wants to talk about it. Everyone's ashamed and feel guilty, and those are the two main tools of the manipulator: guilt and shame. And they try to threaten and intimidate you, and they triangulate. They will try to isolate you from all the closest people in your life and either isolate you from them or turn them against you. And then you're left alone. And the more you're isolated, the easier you are for them to control and manipulate. And it's a long road to recover after being in a long-term relationship like that, where you've basically lost yourself. You don't even recognize who you are. All you did was put your trust in someone. You tried to do what you thought was right, and you were taken advantage of. And that's what you got to recognize, is that being a victim of abuse, it's not your fault. You didn't choose to be abused. The other person did that. You tried to be supportive and a good person, and you were taken advantage of. And that's how these situations go. And to a lot of the people I've already spoken with, they're betrayed by some of the closest people in their lives in these situations, which is just compounds the trauma. You're being abused by your partner. You're seeking your closest friends for help, and they usually end up turning against you or helping abuse you in these situations. And that's so sad. I wasn't the only one this happened to. Almost everyone else I've spoken to has a similar story, almost the same. And it's really sad to see people being taken advantage of and manipulated and having their lives destroyed because they trusted and they tried to do what they thought was right. And they were taken advantage of. So people that have empathy and can recognize that this is wrong, this behavior is wrong, and that they feel bad for other people, seeing other people going through the same situation. It's these people need to come together, and this is why I helped run and got into the support groups myself, because I was lost and I didn't know what to do or where to turn to for help. And I found some other people who had gone through the same thing as me. And I was so surprised to hear that. It was almost identical stories. And I thought I was just alone. And that was one of the biggest things I remember, was having someone else share what they went through. And I didn't have to explain what I went through because they already knew. They went through it already. And it made me feel so much less alone, knowing that other people knew how I felt. Because in my situation, all my friends and family, none of them understood. Nobody understood, and I felt even more alone because of that. And the only people that did understand were some strangers from across the continent who recognized what I was going through and reached out to me to give me some messages of support and try to help me. So there's a couple of strangers that just took the time to speak with me and talk to me. And those two people that took the time to speak with me and talk to me changed my life. My life was in a very bad position, and I didn't know how to get out of where I was. I hear this story, and just going to share it now. It's this person. They're down in a hole, and they have a shovel, and they keep digging. But no matter how much they dig, they can't get out. And people walk by and look down, and they'll offer support and give some advice on how to resolve things, but then they go away and leave you down in that hole. So the person just continues to dig, and they don't know how to go until one person comes along, and they see this person down in the hole, and they ask them, "What's wrong?" They said, "Well, I don't know how to get out of this hole." So the person that was walking by and saw this person in the hole, they jumped down there with them. They said, "It's okay. I was here before. I know how to get out." And they try to help that person. They do help that person get out of that hole. That's where I was. And two people, two strangers, took the time to read what I wrote in a support group and contacted me and to let me know that I wasn't alone and provide me with some information, advice on how to move forward with my situation. And those two people were David Schubert and Keith Marsalek. They both have been very active in the parental alienation world for a number of years, and I still thank them today when I have the opportunity to speak with them for how much they changed my life with just by taking the time to speak with me and help me. So I try to do the same and share the information, wisdom, and knowledge that they shared with me with other people that are down in that hole and trying to get out. And that's why I'm here. And the more people that learn how to get out of that hole, more people are likely to stop and help somebody else out of that hole. So that's why I'm having these podcasts so people can share their stories and let other people know. So no one's alone trying to get out of the hole that they're down in, they're stuck in. Because if you don't know how to do it, you can't, and you won't. You'll be down there forever. And people might come by and offer some help, but they're not going to stay because they really don't know why you're not getting out or why you're stuck down there. And here's someone who CAS just wants me to move on. So I'm assuming this person's from Ontario. CAS is the agency for child protection in Ontario. And yes, all agencies will want you just to move on. And they've already made decisions in these matters. And they don't want to deal with them anymore. They just want you to go away. And that's the sad fact. You know, you think these agencies are there to do things in the best interest of the children. Really, they're not. That's what they quote, but none of them really know what's the best interest of the child if they can't determine which of the parents is abusive towards children. And according to Dr. Stephen Miller, they fail to recognize these situations 95% of the time and leave the children with an abusive parent. While it might not be physical abuse, it's psychological or emotional abuse, which, according to the American Psychological Association, in a study they conducted in 2012 or 2014, I can't remember which, but they conducted a study and they looked at two groups of children that were subjected to abuse. One group was subjected to physical and sexual abuse. Now that group, we'll say, is on this side. The other group, on this side, no physical or sexual abuse, just psychological and emotional. They were, that would be equivalent to coercive and controlling behaviors as a form of family violence recognized by the new Divorce Act here in Canada. So for these two groups, when they looked at the numbers to try to identify one group from the other, they really couldn't. The statistics, the numbers, the responses, the indicators, they were identical for each group except for one. There was one slight difference in indicators from one group to the other. One group had a slightly higher rate of suicide than the other group. Other than that, they were indistinguishable. One group had a higher suicide rate than the other. And the group that had a higher suicide rate were the children that suffered from psychological and emotional abuse. Not the children that suffered from physical and sexual abuse, but the ones that suffered from psychological and emotional abuse. Now, this is where people need to understand and realize how damaging and traumatizing it is for a child to suffer from psychological or emotional abuse. If you were to call the police or a child protection agency and say this child is being molested by their parent, the cops would throw out the rules and bust doors in and be hauling people out of the house in these situations, pending the outcome of an investigation to determine whether or not the allegations were true. But when it comes to psychological and emotional abuse, they don't know how to recognize that. The courts don't know how to recognize that. Child protection agencies in New Brunswick don't know how to recognize that. So because of the failure to recognize psychological and emotional abuse, it just continues. And for people who are unaware, the suicide rates in children have remained static since they started documenting, keeping track of the number of suicides by children. In the last 10 years, there has been a double and triple the number of suicides in the age range of young children. And most professionals don't know why. And they're having difficulty understanding why the suicide rates in children have jumped so dramatically so quickly. And I believe it's directly related to the family courts. The fact that more and more children are growing up in a dysfunctional family unit, with divorce being at 50%. So they're growing up just living and watching domestic violence, intimate partner violence on a regular basis for years until the parents divorce. And when the divorce happens, that causes even more damage to the children. But because of what they've seen and been subjected to and witnessed, they grow up believing that that is the normal family dynamic because that's what they grew up in, and they don't know anything different. And they will grow up and continue the same pattern of abuse with their family, which is why I believe the statistics and the numbers of suicides have gone up dramatically in children over the last 10 years. There was a study conducted on women who were being alienated and being persecuted by the courts, roughly the same way that any alienated parent is. Alienation happens equally to men and women. people that get custody or almost primarily the mothers in these situations. So custody is a different issue, whether mother or father gets custody. And that there again is from the 70s. And during that time, most women were at home and didn't have jobs. They were supported by the husband. So that's how the family dynamic was. If the parents separated or divorced, the children would stay with the mother because the father had to make a living to support his children and family. Now, today's society, parents are pretty equal in these in providing income, household income, and looking after the children. So it's a much different family dynamic today than it was in the 70s. And everything needs to change to recognize how society has changed and how families have changed in this time period. Right now, that they're still making decisions as if families grew up back in the 70s. Uh, they're still failing to recognize the parental alienation that both parents, not just men, can be perpetrators of abuse. You use coercive and controlling behaviors, and coercive and controlling behaviors in the family situation is recognized in Canada now as family violence. The problem is, while the courts have recognized these types of behaviors as family violence, the police still don't. They don't even know what the term is or what it means most times if you ask them. And that's very sad because they're usually the first people dealing with these situations. It's the first ones to get involved would be the police and child protection agencies before it ever gets to court. And that's part of the problem with once issues get to court, they've already had this influence by the police or by child protection agencies. And again, it's an adversarial system. So the judges are looking to pick sides and make decisions not based on the information, but on what they believe the situation is. Because really in family courts, there is no criteria that needs to be satisfied for a judge to make a decision. They have the ability to make decisions, and that's their decision. You can appeal their decision, but you need to have grounds to appeal it, and they have to have made the decision in error. If you just don't like their decision or think it was wrong, that's not a good enough reason, and they won't do anything. So this is where you have to get a professional in to get them to recognize the situation. And after you've already spent all your money in legal fees and trying to get a divorce resolved, usually you don't have any funds or any ability to hire professionals to come in and make a diagnosis of the situation. And if the other party doesn't want to be interviewed or take part in this process, they don't have to. It needs to be court ordered. And same with the children. Unless both parties agree, this situation will go undiagnosed and can for years. And it has 7 years in my case. 7 years. And I still get the same response from the judges. Why are you here? Don't you see your children? Well, yes, I do see my children. But there are times the court order is not followed and I don't see my children. And no one does anything about it. I've made the reports, and I just like to make sure that I continue to see my children. That's it. But instead of them recognizing that I'm there asking for help, they see me as causing trouble. They're trying to label me as a vexatious litigant, so they don't have to deal with anything, and they're looking to award costs. That's the next step. That's how the courts, if they don't like that you're appealing their decisions or that they've made a wrong decision, and you can bring in new evidence like a medical report from a professional and it doesn't coincide with their decisions, they will ignore it. They'll say it doesn't matter. I don't have to accept this in as evidence, and because you made this application to court, I'm going to award costs to the other party. And that's how they try to deal with parents that are looking for help. They further abuse you in the hopes that you'll go away and they don't have to make a decision on these matters. Because they've already made a decision, and as far as they were concerned, they made the right decision initially. Even though you have new evidence to provide them, medical reports, even reports from a world-leading expert in the field of parental alienation that says this is a case of child abuse. The courts will disregard it completely just because it didn't coincide with the decisions they previously made. And because of that, everyone in this situation will continue to be abused. It's a terrible situation. It completely destroys families. It takes away the income, the future of the children. It's a terrible process, and people need to understand how the process works before they get steamrolled by it. Because once that happens, you're so broken, you're not going to be able to get back up and try to get this resolved on your own. You need some serious help. And most people don't have the resources to get that kind of help. An example of that would be Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie. After 5 years of litigation in the family court and millions of dollars in legal fees, one party got the judge thrown out. So that means they have to start all over again. So 5 years of going through court, testimony, providing information, and it's all swiped away. It's gone. They have to start all over again. And that's why it's so hard to recognize these cases and make the right decisions, because when they start off making the wrong decision 95% of the time, according to Dr. Stephen Miller, they assume they made the right decision, and no one's willing to go back and say, I made a mistake. If people would just acknowledge that they made a mistake, look at the evidence instead of looking at the evidence from one side. Because I've had many police and lawyers and judges question me, and most of them disregard almost everything I say because they already have a preconceived notion of what the situation is. And they're just looking for me to confirm what they believe. And anything that I tell them that doesn't coincide with what they believe, they disregard and ignore. So I may be providing them a lot of information and a lot of evidence, but they don't even see it for what it is, because it doesn't coincide with their preconceived notion of what is actually happening in the situation. People need to acknowledge they may have made a mistake in their initial assessment, and they need to look at the evidence a little harder instead of just looking for evidence to corroborate the story or narrative they've been presented that makes a lot of sense to them, that looks like it could be right, just by taking a quick glance at the two parties and the situation and the story they're being told, by seeing how the two parties behave and act. It's counterintuitive, according to Dr. Stephen Miller. And that's why judges and courts make wrong decisions 95% of the time. Instead of seeing the traumatized person for being the victim of abuse, they see them as the cause of the problem and make decisions against them, further abusing and traumatizing them. This needs to change. This is why I'm here, and I have people on, and I hope to have more guests on to share their stories, so other people know they're not alone, they know how the system works. And once they know how the system works, they might be able to better deal with it instead of walking in with the notion that the judge is going to recognize the truth and things are going to change when I go to court. No, that's not usually what happens. And you need to be prepared for that. And if you're not, the judge is going to see you become activated and even more traumatized. And as soon as you behave in that manner, again, that's just their justification for saying that party's the problem. That's why they're here, is because of that party and how that person's behaving. That's not normal. And you're right, it's not normal. It's not normal for normal range human behavior, but it's very normal for a traumatized person. And because they can't tell the difference, they just further abuse them. Anyway, I've been on for almost an hour tonight. I did not get Trevor. He did not get logged in. I'm sorry I didn't get to have a guest on tonight, but hopefully we'll be able to have him on another night. And I do have someone booked for next week. So for this week, I'll say goodnight. And remember, you're not alone. And if anyone needs any help or support, my name is Bill Edgett. I'm on Facebook. Feel free to message me and reach out. And I'll try to provide as much help as I can. Thank you. Take care.